They called her the drifter, the woman without a man, a name, or a place she belonged. They saw her boots caked in dust from the endless roads she wandered. They saw the sorrow in her eyes, deeper than any desert canyon. Then one day, a feared man, deadly as a rattlesnake and twice as cruel, stepped out of the shadows and took her, as if she were nothing more than unclaimed property. A crack of thunder in a clear sky. The hush of an entire saloon. A single gunshot echoing in the wind. That was how it began, with nothing but trouble on the horizon. The sky stretched over the Arizona territory like a worn-out canvas, its color a dull mix of dusty blue and scorched gold. Rays of sun roasted the red rock mesas and unpaved roads, turning the ground into a heated anvil beneath anyone's boots. The young woman walked alone, kicking up puffs of dust with each weary step. Her clothes were threadbare, a frayed skirt, a blouse that had once been white, now stained with grime and desert sweat. She wore no bonnet, and her hair hung in limp, tangled strands around her cheeks. No one knew her name. Some said she had none. Others believed she'd hidden it to escape a dark past. Still others, like old Joe Watson at the general store in the tiny settlement called Daggerstone, said she had come in on the stage one day, stowed away beneath sacks of mail and tobacco. He insisted she was trouble, though. Whether trouble sought her or she brought, it was uncertain. She never spoke more than a few words to anyone. When pressed, she might offer a faint whisper of a voice, "Water, please," or "Thank you." The folks in Daggerstone might have pitied her if she hadn't had that look, a hollow, haunted expression that warned people to keep their distance. She was young, perhaps 19 or 20, but her eyes carried the weight of lifetimes. Rumors thrived in small towns. They said she was an outlaw's daughter. They said she'd stabbed a man in a high-stakes card game near Tombstone and was fleeing a bounty. They said she was from Chicago or St. Louis or maybe even some far-off place across the ocean. No one ever confirmed a thing. She seemed outside everything, outside law, outside society, outside the realm of the living. A ghost walking beneath the punishing sun. She had no man, no companions, and by all accounts, no home. She lingered in Daggerstone because it was the last place the stagecoach driver had let her off before heading back east. The only rides heading west were freight wagons bound for the mining camps. She attempted to find some odd work washing plates at Madame Lucinda's boarding house, sweeping out the saloon for pennies, anything to earn enough coin to move on. But no matter how many nights she tried, the road out of town never materialized. She was stranded there, a lost soul, among other lost souls who'd settled in that godforsaken dust bowl. One twilight, after weeks of drifting around, she found herself seated on a battered stool outside Daggerstone's lone saloon. She looked down the main street as the setting sun cast red shadows across the desert. The heat still radiated off the ground, baking the meager breeze. She closed her eyes and tried to recall a time or place where things had been different, where she had a name, a family, a dream. But her mind was a jigsaw puzzle, missing most of the pieces. That's when she heard hoofbeats, slow and deliberate, echoing off the wooden storefronts. She opened her eyes to see a rider approaching tall, in the saddle of a black horse. Dust swirled around him. The entire street seemed to hold its breath. Men retreated indoors as though the rider carried plague. Women pulled their children close. Even the saloon doors, usually swinging with life and drunkenness at this hour, went still as the figure dismounted. He was all in black hat, coat, boots, and gloves. A bandana of deep crimson was looped around his neck. He tethered his horse to the hitching post with a practiced flick of his wrist and looked up, eyes as dark as the bottom of a well, locked onto her. She felt her mouth go dry. For a moment, time paused. A tumbleweed drifted across the street behind him. The last bit of sunlight glinted off his holster, revealing a custom revolver silver filigree shining in a savage display. She recognized the weapon, though she couldn't remember why. She just knew it carried a reputation, and that knowledge made her heart pound. He walked toward her boots, thudding against the wooden walkway. His spurs jingled softly. When he stopped, he towered over her shadow, blocking the fading sun. "You," he said, voice low and cold. "Get up." She didn't move. Her limbs felt pinned under the weight of his gaze. "Do it," he repeated. She stood, her knees trembling. She had no idea who he was, but the whisper around the town's edges was enough. He was trouble incarnate, the kind she'd spent her life running from or running toward. She couldn't be sure which. Without warning, he grabbed her by the wrist. His grip was iron, leaving her no chance to slip free. Horror flared in her eyes as she looked around for help, but nobody dared intervene. The men watching from behind windows simply lowered their blinds. Women in doorways shut themselves inside. It was as though she suddenly didn't exist, or perhaps she was a sacrifice to a vengeful god. "Let's go," he growled. She wanted to speak to beg for mercy or cry out for deliverance, but her voice seemed locked behind her panic. In that moment, her life changed. A new path, darker, uncertain, unfurled beneath her feet. She had no man, no name, and no place to call home. And this feared rider had just taken her without asking, dragging her off into the unknown. The rider's name, so rumor held, was Damon Reyes. He had carved a bloody legend from Texas to New Mexico to Arizona, known for lightning-fast gunplay and a vendetta that left bodies in his wake. People whispered he had once been a deputy under Wyatt Earp down in Tombstone, but a disagreement over a corrupt lawman turned Damon into an outlaw. Others said he was part Mexican bandit, part Apache warrior, or part demon from the gates of hell itself. Whatever the truth, most folks simply referred to him as the Angel of Death, because where he went, graves soon followed. In a matter of minutes, the woman found herself hoisted onto his horse. He mounted behind her, one powerful arm wrapped around her waist, the other holding the reins. Her head spun with fear and confusion. His arm felt like a steel bar against her ribs, impossible to push away. She knew she should struggle harder, scream, fight, but something about the final acceptance in his presence quelled her resistance. Perhaps it was the knowledge that no one in Daggerstone would lift a finger to stop him. Perhaps it was the exhaustion of constant drifting. Or maybe it was the mystery in his dark eyes, a flicker of something she recognized as utter loneliness, a mirror of her own. They rode out of the town in silence, the horses' hooves pounding in a steady rhythm. The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in crimson and indigo. Soon the desert night draped them, the stars flickering cold and distant. His grip never slackened, nor did it bruise her. It was firm, but surprisingly steady, as though he carried her not out of tenderness, but out of duty. After what felt like hours, Damon guided the horse down a narrow canyon, the walls pressing close, swallowing them in shadow. Finally, he reined up beside a small trickle of a stream, where cottonwoods stood in a patch of oasis. He dismounted first, then reached up to help her down. She slid into his arms, boots hitting the earth. She took a shaky step back. He rummaged in his saddlebag, and pulled out some jerky, tossing a strip at her. She caught it clumsily. His gesture was abrupt, with no words of explanation or concern. When he turned to water his horse, she realized he hadn't once asked her name, nor had he offered his. She barely recalled the rumors swirling in her head: Angel of Death, Damon Reyes, the dreaded gunfighter. Yet strangely, he didn't carry himself with the flamboyance of a typical outlaw. No wild threats or maniacal grin, only a stark quiet, like a crypt. She forced herself to find her voice. Why did you take me?" He kept his back to her. "Why not?" Her heart hammered. "I'm no one. I have nothing." He finished watering the horse, then turned. "Exactly." His eyes narrowed as though sizing her up. "But you looked at me back there. You didn't cower like the rest." She shivered. "I was scared." He took a step closer, his expression unreadable. "You didn't look away." She realized then that maybe he'd seen in her the same emptiness she saw in him. A recognition that all the running in the world never outran one's own ghosts. Maybe that was why he had chosen her out of the entire town. Or maybe she thought he just needed someone to keep him company in his solitary destruction. Her mind raced, searching for an escape plan, but every direction promised only a trackless desert, scorpions, and death. He gestured at the ground. "We camp here tonight." She nodded numbly, still at his mercy. Under the moonlight, she gathered stray branches for a fire while he unsaddled the horse. His movements were efficient, shaped by a life of traveling from one lonely campsite to another. He spoke only when necessary, words curt and measured. Yet as the night wore on, she sensed a subtle tension in him, a restlessness. He was a killer, she had no doubt, but there was something more, a chasm within him that matched her own. They shared jerky and drank from the stream in tense silence. At one point, she noticed a brand on his forearm, a scar of sorts. It looked like a symbol, half burned and half carved. She wondered if it had to do with some secret society or a revenge oath from a territory war. She had so many questions. Instead, she merely stared, uncertain if speaking would provoke his wrath. When the fire's embers died, Damon lay back on his bedroll, the brim of his hat low over his eyes. "Sleep," he said. "We ride early." She glanced around for a second blanket. There was none. Hesitantly, she settled onto the bare ground near the warm ashes. She could hear his breath, steady but guarded. She listened to the desert nightlife, crickets, the distant call of a coyote. Sleep seemed impossible. Too many thoughts clamored in her head. She was alone with a dangerous man, with no hope for rescue, no family to miss her. And yet she felt oddly calmer than she ever had in Daggerstone. Perhaps it was the quiet acceptance that for now the path lay in his hands. She drifted into a fitful doze, haunted by dreams of black horses galloping across a blood-red plain, of a faceless woman searching for a name. Each time she stirred, she caught a glimpse of Damon's silhouette, motionless but vigilant, as though he never truly slept. They broke camp before dawn. Damon nudged her awake, and within minutes they had packed the scant belongings and mounted up once more. Their path wound between towering cliffs tinted pink by the rising sun. Boulders loomed overhead, precariously balanced as if a single misstep could send an avalanche crashing down. As they rode, he finally broke the silence. "You got a name?" he asked. She hesitated. Did she? She could recall syllables from a past life, but they felt distant. Over time, she'd used aliases, Mary Anna Rose, never settling on one. "Not anymore," she said, softly, choosing honesty for once. He nodded, as though that was answer enough. "All right then." They continued on. Her mind churned with questions. "Where are we going?" "Somewhere," he replied. That was all he offered. She sighed, letting the silence swallow her again. The day's heat built quickly. Before long, her throat was parched, her skin slick with sweat. Damon occasionally handed her the canteen, but said nothing more. His presence behind her so close was unnerving, yet strangely reassuring in this vast, empty desert. Eventually, they emerged from the canyon onto rolling hills dotted with scrub. A road, more a wagon track than anything, stretched north and south. Damon turned his horse north without explanation. After another few miles, they spotted a stagecoach way station, a low adobe building with a broken sign out front reading Half Moon Station. A battered corral held a few scrawny horses, and the faint smell of coffee drifted on the breeze. Damon pulled the horse to a stop. "We'll rest here," he said. The station master, a wiry man named Franklin White, she'd seen him once in Daggerstone, sat in a rocking chair outside. He nearly leapt out of his seat when he recognized Damon. Panic flared in Franklin's eyes, but Damon offered a silent stare that kept him from fleeing. Franklin swallowed hard and gestured for them to dismount. "Sure is a hot day," Franklin stammered. "Got coffee if you want it." They followed him inside. It was a small space with a single table, a hearth, and a makeshift kitchen area. Franklin poured 2 tin cups of coffee, hands shaking. Damon took one. She took the other, grateful for the caffeine despite its bitterness. Franklin cleared his throat. "Heard you were in these parts, Damon. Heard some rumors." "I'm sure you did," Damon said coldly. "About the Pinkertons. The reward." Damon's expression hardened. The Pinkerton Detective Agency was relentless in pursuing wanted men. She watched him carefully, anxious about what might happen next. Franklin's gaze shifted to her. "And you, Miss You? You all right?" She didn't know how to answer. She shrugged. Damon's hand edged closer to the revolver on his hip. Franklin caught the movement and paled, deciding not to press. The tension in the room was thick enough to choke on. They drank their coffee in silence. Franklin tried to make small talk, mentioning the latest stage that passed through the absence of Apache raids in recent weeks, but Damon responded with grunts. Finally, Damon placed his empty cup on the table, rummaged in his coat pocket, and tossed a coin on the wood. "Feed us," he commanded. "Then we'll be on our way." Franklin nodded, half relieved that Damon was paying rather than simply taking by force. He whipped up a quick meal of beans and salt pork served on chipped plates. It was hardly gourmet, but it beat jerky. She ate in silence, glancing at Damon between mouthfuls. He stared at the table as though lost in memory, his jaw set tight. When they finished, Damon rose abruptly. "We've stayed long enough." He looked at her. "Let's go." She followed him outside, where he saddled up. Franklin stood by, wringing his hands. "Safe travels," he muttered the words, forced. Damon only nodded before spurring the horse forward, taking her away from that little station. They rode northward, the sun climbing to a scorching zenith. For hours they kept to the road, passing only the occasional tumbleweed or circling vulture overhead. Finally, in mid-afternoon, they reached a crossroads. A battered signpost indicated that to the east lay Prescott, to the north Holbrook, and to the west nothing but a question mark. Damon pulled up the horse. "We head west," he said, voice low. She frowned. "Why west?" He didn't answer. Instead, he kicked the horse's flanks, guiding them off the established route into the wild unknown. She braced herself, unsure what new dangers awaited them beyond the edges of the map. By sundown, they arrived at an abandoned ranch, a few collapsed fences, a dilapidated barn, and a rickety cabin. Grass had grown tall around the rotted wood. The wind whispered through broken window panes like the voices of restless spirits. Damon dismounted and motioned for her to follow. Warily, she stepped inside the cabin. Dust motes floated in the last rays of daylight, revealing a sparse interior, a fireplace crumbling on one side, a table missing a leg, and a single rocking chair overturned in the corner. Damon ran his fingers across the mantel, collecting soot and cobwebs. His face was unreadable, but she saw tension in the set of his shoulders. He knelt by a loose floorboard, pried it open, and retrieved a small tin box. Inside lay a few faded photographs, a piece of cloth with embroidered initials, and a child's wooden toy, a carved horse missing an ear. Damon stared at these items as though they were ghosts resurrected. She hovered nearby, uncertain if she should speak. Finally he spoke, in a voice laced with bitterness. "This was my father's ranch. Before everything went to hell." She inhaled sharply. This place had once been his home. She looked around, imagining the ranch alive with cattle horses in the stable, laughter by the hearth. Now, it was a graveyard of memories. He set the carved horse in her palm. "My mother made that for me when I was 5. Her name was Rosa. She died of cholera before I turned 6. She gently touched the horse's rough edges. "I'm sorry," she whispered, moved by the vulnerability in his revelation. He shrugged it off. "My father tried to keep it going after she passed. Then the war came, then the raids, then the greed. Men from the city wanted this land, claimed he owed debts. One day, we woke up to men burning the barn, shooting the livestock. My father tried to stop them and was gunned down. I fled." She swallowed, feeling an unexpected ache in her chest. She had not imagined Damon as a child, a victim of cruelty himself. He had become the monster that once destroyed him. Or perhaps he was just a product of the desert's harsh law. "Why come back now?" she asked quietly. His jaw clenched. "Because there's a man, Lionel Barker. He orchestrated the takeover. I've been hunting him for years, and rumor says he's holed up in Willow Bend, a mining town west of here. I intend to finish what he started." She realized with a chill that was Damon's mission, vengeance, pure and simple. And she was along for the ride, a pawn in a vendetta she barely understood. He exhaled and stood, carefully placing the box back under the floorboard. "We'll stay the night." As they prepared a makeshift sleeping arrangement on the dusty floor, she mustered the courage to ask, "Why did you bring me?" He didn't look at her. "Don't know. Maybe I needed a reminder that not everything in the world is worth leaving behind." His voice softened with a hint of regret. "Or maybe you just looked too damn lonely." She felt tears threaten to well in her eyes. She quickly looked away, focusing on the flickering shadows from the lantern he'd lit. They shared a canteen of water, finishing off the last of the day's provisions. Then Damon tossed a tattered blanket over her as though to shield her from the ghosts that haunted this place. The next morning they set out on horseback again, forging deeper into lawless territory. Neither had much to say. She sensed his resolve. The man named Lionel Barker was Damon's sole objective. She wondered what would happen when Damon's vendetta ended. Would he cast her aside? Would he kill Barker and ride off, leaving her in the dust? They found a winding trail, leading toward a range of hills, passing old mining camps and deserted claims. Rusted machinery, half buried in red dirt, bore witness to men's dreams turned to ruin. Occasionally, they came across a ragged prospector or two. Those men would stare wide-eyed at Damon's imposing figure and quickly retreat. Late in the day, they reached a canyon with steep walls that glowed amber in the setting sun. At its mouth stood a rough-hewn sign, Willow Bend 5 miles. Damon halted, scanning the cliffs. A sense of dread enveloped her. The place looked like an ambush waiting to happen. He swung down from the saddle, studying the rocky ledges. "We camp here," he announced. "Go into town tomorrow." She nodded, too weary to protest. They hiked a short distance to find a suitable campsite. A small cave offered some shelter from the elements. As they gathered wood for a fire, the distant howls of coyotes reminded them that in these parts, man was not the only hunter. Night fell. Their campfire cast dancing shapes on the cave walls. Damon leaned against a rock, cleaning his revolver with careful precision. She watched him from across the flames, trying to reconcile this stoic killer with the boy who once clutched a wooden toy horse. She gathered her nerve. "Back in Daggerstone, what if I had refused to go with you?" He glanced up, dark eyes reflecting the firelight. "I wouldn't have forced you." He paused. "But I suspected you wouldn't refuse." A hollow laugh escaped her. "Was I that desperate?" He shrugged, resuming his gun cleaning. "We all got our reasons." She shifted uncomfortably. The truth was, she might have followed anyone who offered a change from her stagnant misery. "You think I'll be any help in Willow Bend?" she asked, half sarcastic. He set the revolver aside. "I don't need help, but maybe you do." The words stung because they rang with truth. She was adrift, reliant on the scraps of goodwill or cruelty people threw her way. Damon was the only tether she had to any sense of direction. "Damon," she began, and then realized it was the first time she'd said his name out loud. The syllables hung between them like an unanswered question. "After all this, what then?" His jaw tightened. "I've never planned that far." She wrapped her arms around herself as if chilled by more than just the night air. "I used to have a name," she whispered, "but I left it behind when I ran from a man who hurt me. Every time I told someone my name, he'd find me. So I stopped telling." He watched her quietly, not pressing for details. There was a rugged compassion in his silence. She appreciated that he let her story remain hers to tell in her own time. Eventually, fatigue overcame them both. Damon insisted on taking first watch, so she curled up near the fire with a battered blanket. As she drifted to sleep, she caught glimpses of his silhouette, tall and solitary against the desert night, protector or captor, or perhaps both. At daybreak, they followed the narrow canyon path to Willow Bend. A sign posted at the entrance read, "Population 212, though whether that count was recent or decades old was unclear. The main street was lined with wooden structures, 2 saloons, a boarding house, a general store, and a small church leaning precariously to one side. Miners, ranch hands, and gamblers prowled the street. Yet as Damon rode in with her perched in front, heads turned and a hush fell. Men recognized the gunslinger or sensed his aura of danger. She felt their stares burning into her back. They dismounted outside a saloon named the Silver Chalice. Swinging doors squeaked, revealing a smoky interior. Damon strode in, scanning the patrons. Most were coarse-looking men, in dusty work clothes, a few gamblers in threadbare suits, and a saloon girl perched on a man's lap. A piano in the corner went silent as Damon's boots thudded on the floorboards. He approached the bar shoulders tense. She stayed close, heart pounding. The bartender, a burly fellow with graying sideburns, swallowed nervously. "What'll it be?" Mr. Damon's gaze flicked to the bartender's nameplate pinned to his vest. It read, C.D. Waterman. "You seen Lionel Barker?" Damon asked, voice echoing in the sudden stillness. Waterman's eyes darted around. "Now, Damon, everyone knows who you are." Word travels. If you're after Barker, Damon leaned forward, voice dropping. I asked if you've seen him. A muscle in Waterman's jaw twitched. He was here a week ago, boasting about a claim he took over. Rumor says he's holed up at the Black Ridge mine a few miles northwest. Damon nodded, his expression grim. He slid a coin across the bar. Bottle of whiskey, Waterman complied, placing a half-full bottle in front of him. Damon grabbed it and turned to go the crowd, parting like the Red Sea. She hurried after him, uneasy, under so many watchful eyes. Outside, Damon took a swig from the bottle, then tossed it aside, letting the amber liquid spill into the dirt. She noticed his hand tremble slightly. Was it rage or something else? He mounted up and lifted her onto the horse behind him. Let's finish this, he growled, spurring the animal out of town. She clung to him, feeling the muscles in his back tense, like coiled snakes. The path led them through foothills, pocked with abandoned shafts and tailings. Sparse brush clung to the rocky slopes. By midday, they reached the Black Ridge mine, a cluster of shacks, and a main entrance carved into the mountainside. Smoke rose from a chimney near a larger cabin, and a few men milled around, rifles in hand. Damon reined in. Stay behind me, he ordered. She nodded, heart pounding. They approached slowly. A guard shouted, Halt, state your business. Damon didn't slow. He stopped just out of rifle range and called back, I'm looking for Lionel Barker. The guard's face paled. He recognized Damon. He ain't here, the guard lied, backing away. Damon drew his revolver in a single, fluid motion. I know he's here, he said, the steel in his tone unyielding. Bring him out. The guard looked around anxiously. Another man emerged from a shack, armed with a shotgun. Tension crackled in the hot air. Damon dismounted, pulling her down with him. He shoved her behind a boulder for cover. Stay put, he said, voice tight. Then he marched forward, gun raised. Barker, he bellowed, the echo rattling the canyon walls. We got unfinished business. A moment later, a tall figure in a dusty brown duster stepped onto the porch of the main cabin. His hair was silver at the temples, and the lines on his face suggested a life of cunning. Two armed men flanked him. Damon Reyes, Lionel Barker, said, lips curling in a sneer. The boy from that worthless ranch. His voice dripped with contempt. I heard you were sniffing around. You stole my land, Damon accused. Killed my father. Burned our home. I've been hunting you ever since. Barker laughed, a harsh sound. Your father was a fool who couldn't pay his debts. The land was worthless anyway. Rage darkened Damon's face. You'll pay for it now. The standoff teetered, both men poised to draw. She crouched behind the boulder, heart racing. This was Damon's reason for living, the moment he'd sought for years. She clenched her fists, fearing the hail of bullets that would follow. Then, in a lightning-swift motion, Damon fired. One of Barker's henchmen went down, a bullet in his chest. The other dived for cover, returning fire. Shots rang out, echoing off the rocks. She pressed herself into the ground as bullets whizzed overhead. Barker dashed inside the cabin, slamming the door. Damon advanced, firing at the guard with the rifle. A shot caught Damon's arm, and he hissed in pain, but kept moving. With each return shot, he dropped another of Barker's hired guns, unstoppable in his fury. She realized she couldn't stay hidden forever. If Damon was pinned down, he'd be outnumbered. Gathering her courage, she peered around the boulder. One guard aimed at Damon's back. Without thinking, she grabbed a fallen pistol from a dead man's hand. She steadied her shaking arm and fired the recoil, jolting her. The guard cried out, clutching his side. Damon glanced back at her, shock briefly crossing his features. He gave a curt nod of approval, then kicked in the cabin door. Gunshots flared inside. She heard furniture splinter, glass shatter. An agonized scream rent the air. A tense silence followed. She stood, legs trembling, pistol clutched in her sweaty grip. Smoke drifted from the cabin door. She forced her feet to move, stepping over bodies, ignoring the stench of gunpowder and blood. Inside, dust swirled in the sunbeams that cut through bullet holes in the walls. Damon stood in the center, revolver still smoking. On the floor, Lionel Barker lay in a pool of blood, clutching a gaping wound in his chest. He coughed wetly, hatred gleaming in his eyes. Damon knelt beside him. "You killed my family, took everything. How's it feel to lose your life over greed?" Barker spat blood. "This territory belongs to men like me. You're just a drifter." Damon pressed the revolver's barrel against Barker's forehead. She gasped, heart pounding. Would he pull the trigger? Then Damon paused, pulling the gun away. He stood, fists clenched. "Dying's too easy for you," he muttered. "You rot here." Barker's eyes widened, realizing Damon intended to let him bleed out suffering. Barker reached for a hidden derringer, but Damon stomped on his wrist with a savage crunch. Barker wailed, cursing Damon's name with his last breath as blood seeped into the dusty floor. It was over. The vengeance Damon had pursued for years ended in a dusty cabin with Barker's lifeless eyes staring at the ceiling. She edged closer, unsure what to say. Damon stared at the corpse chest, heaving a storm of emotions crossing his face: rage, grief, emptiness. He turned abruptly, marching outside. She followed, stepping carefully around the carnage. The midday sun blinded her momentarily. Damon was already saddling the horse, ignoring the bullet wound that stained his sleeve dark red. She rushed to him. "You're hurt." He didn't respond, focusing on the saddle straps. "We're leaving." She grabbed his arm, voice trembling. "You're bleeding." "Damon, look at me." He finally lifted his gaze. She saw tears glistening in his eyes, though none fell. He was lost, his sole purpose spent. "I have to go," he whispered, voice ragged. Her heart twisted. She realized that revenge might free him from one demon, but it left him unmoored. "Go where?" He shrugged. "Anywhere, far from here. Maybe up north, across the border. Doesn't matter." She hesitated. "Take me with you." He stared at her a long moment, the dryness of the desert wind swirling around them. Then he nodded, a near imperceptible gesture, as though he couldn't deny the connection that had formed between them. Wordlessly, they mounted. She wound her arms around his waist, pressing against him. Together, they rode away from the Black Ridge mine, leaving the wreckage of Damon's past behind. They traveled aimlessly for days, avoiding towns where Pinkertons or old enemies might lurk. Damon's arm wound festered, forcing them to stop periodically so she could clean and bandage it as best she knew how. He refused to seek a doctor, unwilling to risk recognition. Their supplies dwindled, the road stretching on in a haze of heat and dust. Yet something between them changed. For the first time, they talked, truly talked, sharing bits of their lives without the usual guardedness. He revealed that he once had a younger sister who died during the ranch raid. The memory haunted him more than anything. She told him how she'd been forced to leave home because of an abusive fiancé, a man with a devil's charm, she called him. She had fled west, surviving by cunning and luck, losing her real name along the way to keep him from tracking her. Each confession was painful, yet freeing. They were two broken souls, forging a bond in the wilderness, unsure what the future held, but strangely comforted by each other's presence. One evening, after a long day's ride, they made camp near a trickling creek. He seemed feverish from the wound, so she insisted he rest. She built a fire, stewing the last of their salted meat. As darkness fell, she watched him sweat, beading on his brow. She dabbed a cloth on his forehead. "We need help, Damon." He groaned softly, eyes half-lidded. "No doctors," he mumbled. She bit her lip. "You'll die if this infection spreads." He grabbed her wrist with surprising strength. "Don't. Let me." Tears welled in her eyes. She nodded, though dread filled her heart. She didn't want to lose the only person who'd made her feel needed in this world. She cradled his head in her lap, humming a lullaby she barely remembered from her childhood. His breathing slowed, and his grip relaxed as he slipped into a fitful sleep. The moon rose, casting pale light over the desert. Coyotes howled in the distance, but she felt more alone than ever. She looked down at Damon's gaunt face, praying to whatever god might listen that he'd survive the night. At sunrise, Damon was too weak to ride on his own. She helped him onto the horse, determined to find a settlement with any kind of medical help. She recalled hearing of a small mission run by Franciscan monks somewhere in the region. Gathering every scrap of memory from rumors and travelers' tales, she steered the horse southward. By late afternoon, exhaustion battered her, and Damon drifted in and out of consciousness. Finally, the outlines of a modest town emerged in the distance, a cluster of adobe buildings beneath tall cottonwoods. A worn sign read, "Mercy Population 86. She spurred the horse forward, ignoring her own fatigue. A single main street greeted them. Locals stared from behind shutters. A short man, in a priest's robe, hurried out of a whitewashed chapel at the end of the road. "Help me," she cried, voice cracking. The priest, Father Alonso, rushed over, concern plain on his face. What happened to him? She slid down, nearly collapsing. "Gunshot wound. Infected, please." The priest called for help. A few townsfolk emerged carefully, lifting Damon off the horse. They carried him inside the chapel, laying him on a bench near the altar. Father Alonso examined the wound with grave concern. "I can clean it, but he needs rest," the priest said, gently. "We'll do everything we can." She stood by, biting her nails, watching as they tended to Damon. A kindly woman named Conchita offered her a blanket and water. The chapel was cool, built of thick adobe that shielded the desert heat. She sank onto a stool, shaky relief washing over her. Finally, Damon had a fighting chance. Over the next few days, Father Alonso and Conchita cared for Damon, applying herbal poultices and carefully draining the infection. She helped whenever allowed, holding his hand through feverish delirium. At times he thrashed, reliving nightmares of gunfights and burning barns. She whispered calming words, surprised by the depth of her devotion. Word spread in the tiny town about the dangerous gunslinger and his companion. Whispers of fear circulated, yet the townsfolk of Mercy weren't hardened criminals or money-hungry opportunists. They believed in second chances, or so Father Alonso preached. Still, some worried about trouble Damon might bring. One afternoon, a man approached round-faced, wearing a badge. Sheriff Jonathan Blake. His voice was firm, but not unkind. "Ma'am, I hear your friend is an outlaw." She tensed, lying would be pointless. "He's done things, but he's been wronged too." Blake sighed. "This town's name is Mercy for a reason. We don't turn away the suffering. But if he causes trouble, we can't ignore it." She promised Damon wouldn't cause harm. Though the sheriff's eyes remained wary, he eventually nodded, respecting the chapel as a place of healing. For now, Damon was safe. Weeks passed. Damon's fever broke, color returned to his cheeks, and he regained his strength little by little, leaning on her for support as he hobbled around the chapel's courtyard. Father Alonso insisted on daily bandage changes and bed rest, though Damon resisted. He wasn't a man used to being still or reliant on others. During quiet moments, she'd catch him staring at the crucifix above the altar, lost in thought. She wondered if he sought forgiveness or simply marveled at the notion of faith after all he had seen. At times, she'd sit beside him, reading from an old Bible, out of boredom more than devotion. The words gave her a strange comfort, though she wasn't sure she believed any of it. Late one evening, as they sat alone in a pew by candlelight, Damon spoke in a hushed tone. "Why did you stay with me? You could have left me behind." She turned to him, gazing into those dark eyes. "Because you gave me the first real sense of belonging I've had in years." She paused, swallowing. "You never asked my name." He exhaled softly. "I figured you'd tell me when you were ready." She smiled faintly. Her heart raced as she considered telling him the name she once cherished, the name her mother gave her, which she'd abandoned to hide from that monstrous fiancé. But was she still that person, or had she changed too much, Claire? She whispered, tears glistening. "My name is Claire." Damon gently took her hand, thumb tracing the lines of her palm. "Claire," he repeated, as if savoring each letter. She inhaled sharply, relief mixing with fear of the past catching up. They lingered like that, hand in hand, souls laid bare. For the first time in her life, she felt the possibility of a future, a real one, unfolding before her. The path was uncertain, but in mercy, under the chapel's flickering candles, hope bloomed like a fragile desert flower. With Damon's recovery, the question arose, what next? Sheriff Blake, seeing Damon's progress, visited again. This time, he carried newspapers. One featured Damon's face under the headline, "Wanted Damon Reyes, $2,000 reward." Another had stories of Pinkerton agents scouring the territory. Blake's expression was troubled. "I can't ignore that reward forever. Folks might be tempted." Damon's jaw tensed. Claire felt a surge of protectiveness. "He was defending himself," she said. Blake held up a hand. "I know, but the law's the law. If Pinkertons show up, I might not be able to shield him." Damon nodded. He looked at Claire. "We should leave before we cause any trouble here." Her heart clenched. Mercy had been their sanctuary. "Where will we go?" Blake cleared his throat. "There's a chance. If Damon turned himself in to a fair court, a judge might consider extenuating circumstances. But that's a gamble." The idea sounded impossible. Damon was a wanted man with a violent reputation. "They'll hang him," Claire said, voice tight. Blake shrugged. "Maybe, maybe not. Sometimes men earn leniency." Father Alonso would speak on his behalf. Damon stared at the floor. Claire squeezed his hand, fear gnawing her insides. Could they outrun the Pinkertons forever? Would Damon ever find peace if he kept running? They'd both live as fugitives. That wasn't a life, it was an endless chase. Father Alonso entered, overhearing their discussion. "Damon, you've sought vengeance all your life. Is it not time to seek redemption?" Damon closed his eyes. "Redemption?" He echoed, bitterness coating the word. "You think a judge would give me that?" Alonso placed a hand on Damon's shoulder. "Men's hearts can change. You've shown kindness here. If you face the consequences, you might at least find freedom in truth." Claire's mind spun. The odds were slim, but she saw no other path that led anywhere but more bloodshed. She looked at Damon. love and worry twisting inside her. "What do you want to do?" Damon let out a shuddering breath, conflict plain on his face. Finally, he looked into her eyes, a silent apology there. "I can't keep running. Maybe it's time I stood for what I've done, both the good and the bad." Word was sent to the nearest federal marshal in Prescott. A date was arranged for Damon to surrender and stand trial. Sheriff Blake agreed to accompany him along with Father Alonso to speak as character witnesses. Claire insisted on going too. She refused to leave Damon's side. Leaving Mercy felt like losing a haven. The townspeople, including Conchita, gathered to see them off, some offering prayers. Despite Damon's dark reputation, he had earned a measure of respect by not bringing chaos to their quiet place. Father Alonso gave Damon a small wooden cross, which Damon tucked in his pocket without a word. They traveled by wagon, Damon still regaining strength. The road to Prescott was fraught with peril. Not only might outlaws or Pinkertons try to claim the bounty, but the law itself might show no mercy. The nights were sleepless tension, gripping them all. Upon arriving in Prescott, the group went straight to the courthouse. Damon surrendered his weapons and was placed in a holding cell. Claire watched helplessly as the bars locked behind him. The trial was set to begin in 2 days. The days passed in a blur. Father Alonso and Sheriff Blake pleaded Damon's case, how he had lived under relentless injustice, how Lionel Barker had murdered his family and forced Damon down a path of violence. They admitted Damon's crimes, but insisted many were in self-defense, that he harbored remorse. Damon, for his part, refused to deny or embellish. He told the court everything from the ranch's destruction to his final confrontation with Barker. Claire stood beside him whenever allowed, praying. Her presence gave him strength. The prosecutor painted Damon as a merciless outlaw with a bloody trail. Witnesses recounted terrifying encounters, but also admitted Damon never harmed the innocent. He only targeted those who wronged him or threatened him. On the final day, the judge, an aging man named Judge Fairbanks, heard closing statements. The room was tense, spectators packed in to witness the fate of the notorious Damon Reyes. Pinkerton agents hovered in the back, hoping for a conviction. Claire's heart hammered as the judge called for silence. Damon stood straight, face drawn, but resolute. She bit her lip, tears threatening. Judge Fairbanks cleared his throat. "Damon Reyes, you stand accused of multiple counts of manslaughter, illegal duels, and property destruction. The evidence is substantial, yet mitigating circumstances exist. You sought personal justice against those who destroyed your family. This does not excuse vigilante actions, but it provides context." He paused, scanning the courtroom. "The court finds you guilty of manslaughter in multiple instances. However, given the nature of these events, I sentence you to 10 years in Yuma Territorial Prison with eligibility for parole after 5. Let the record show we do not condone vigilantism, but we acknowledge the injustices you suffered." A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. 5 years before possible parole. Damon hung his head, exhaling deeply. It wasn't a death sentence, but it was no freedom either. Claire felt tears slide down her cheeks. The Pinkertons frowned, but had to accept the judge's ruling. Damon turned to her eyes brimming with regret. She stepped forward, ignoring the bailiff's warnings, and embraced him fiercely. "I'll wait," she whispered against his chest. He squeezed her hand, murmuring, "Claire, I'm sorry." The guards led him away in chains. Claire stood in the courthouse numb as the crowd dispersed. Father Alonso gently guided her outside. The sun burned bright, mocking her despair. Yet a faint glimmer of hope lived in her heart, Damon would live. And 5 years was not forever. Claire found lodging in Prescott, determined to remain near Damon, though Yuma Prison was many miles away. She worked odd jobs, cleaning houses, cooking in a small diner, saving every spare coin. She wrote to Father Alonso, who occasionally visited Yuma to offer spiritual services. The news came in bits and pieces. Damon struggled at first in the harsh prison climate, but his health held. Months stretched into years. She never forgot him. Letters were scarce. Damon wasn't allowed to send many. Still, the few she received were precious treasures. Claire, it's hell here, but I keep going. I remember the night sky and the desert wind, how you held me. That memory keeps me from drowning in darkness. Be safe. Damon, she poured her heart into replies, though uncertain if they all reached him. In time, she learned that the warden recognized Damon's skill with horses, allowing him to work in the prison stables. Damon found a small reprieve there, tending to creatures that reminded him of freedom. Every so often, newspapers reported on prison escapes, violence, or disease outbreaks. Each headline made Claire's blood run cold, fearing Damon was caught in the turmoil. But by and large, no news was good news. At night, she'd sit by a small oil lamp, reading worn novels about love and redemption, imagining the day Damon would walk free. She saved money bit by bit. Her plan: buy a small homestead or a piece of land where they could start anew once his sentence was done. It was a slender dream, but it lit her days with purpose. 5 years and 3 months later, the letter came. Miss Claire, I am pleased to inform you that Damon Reyes has been granted early parole for good behavior. He will be released in 2 weeks. Warden Clarkson. Claire's hands shook as she read it. Tears blurred her vision. The day she had longed for had finally arrived. She wasted no time boarding a grueling stagecoach to Yuma. The heat was blistering the roads, cruel, but adrenaline pushed her forward. At the prison gate, she waited with bated breath. Damon emerged, leaner, older, with a faint scar on his temple. His eyes found hers. They stood still for one breathless second, then he dropped his bag and pulled her into his arms. Claire, he whispered, you stayed. I told you I would, she said into his chest, tears soaking his shirt. Outside the prison walls, they stood in the desert sun. Damon stared at the horizon. What now? I have enough saved for a ranch near Mercy, she offered. He searched her eyes. After all I've done, you'd still build a life with me? She cupped his cheek. Yes, if you're ready. I'm done drifting, he said, and together they walked toward the rising sun. They returned to Mercy and were greeted by Father Alonso's warm smile. The town had changed, new faces, a few old ones gone, but the spirit of compassion remained. No one turned Damon away, though whispers lingered. In time, even those faded as people saw the quiet man he had become. Claire used her savings to purchase a modest plot just outside town. The adobe house needed repairs. The barn leaned with age, but it was theirs. Together they rebuilt, mending fences, planting a small garden, and restoring the windmill. Damon tamed mustangs. Claire managed the home with gentle pride. Life was hard, but it was honest. At night, Damon sometimes woke from nightmares, echoes of prison and gunfire. Claire would hold him close, whispering reassurances. Slowly, the past loosened its grip. When Claire discovered she was pregnant, Damon dropped to his knees, awestruck. In that moment, their future crystallized, hard-earned, imperfect, but finally their own. Seasons changed, and their land began to thrive. Chickens clucked in the yard, a pig rooted near the well, and Damon's mustangs grazed in a handmade corral. Mercy had become their true home. Father Alonso visited often, blessing crops and listening to Damon's quiet reflections. One crisp morning, Damon saddled a horse for a supply run. Claire stood on the porch, her pregnant belly round beneath her apron. He approached and held her close, breathing in the scent of morning dew and warm earth. "I'll be back by sundown," he promised, touching the cross from Father Alonso. "Be careful," she whispered, her voice tinged with love and worry. She watched as he rode away, her heart full. From a nameless drifter to Claire Reyes' wife, soon to be mother and keeper of a quiet homestead, they had come far. As she felt their child stir within her, she knew new life had finally bloomed from the dust of the past. And so the story of the nameless drifter and the feared gunslinger found its close not in the crack of gunfire or the echo of revenge, but in the quiet hum of love, redemption, and the promise of a shared life. She had no man, no name, and no place to go when their fates intertwined. He was a legend of violence and fear, yet together they forged a new legend, one of mercy, resilience, and hope. They knew the desert winds might shift again. Ghosts of old enemies might resurface. The world was never truly safe, but in each other they found a reason to stand firm, to plant roots in the sun-baked earth, and to greet each sunrise without regret. Because in the wild frontier of the human heart, the strongest weapon is not a gun. It is the power of second chances. Thank you for walking the dusty trails of this story with me, from the desolate crossroads where a nameless drifter and a feared gunslinger first locked eyes, to the hopeful sunrise that greeted them with a second chance. Their journey reminds us that even in the harshest deserts, compassion can take root. If their tale of vengeance, redemption, and unlikely love spoke to you, then be sure to let others know. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss the next captivating story. Together, we'll explore more thrilling frontiers across sun-scorched deserts, haunted saloons, and beyond. Your support makes these journeys possible. Thank you for joining me under the wide-open skies of imagination. Until next time, may your days be guided by hope, your nights by courage, and your heart always ready to embrace a second chance.